The rain was coming down hard when my son-in-law threw my suitcase onto the soaked driveway. "That's all your stuff," he said, shoving $500 into my hand. "Get out. You don't belong here anymore." My daughter stood beside him, staring down at the floor. "Dad, this is better for everyone." Then the front door slammed shut and locked behind them. I thought losing my family was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Until the next morning when a call from a lawyer changed my entire life. "I am so grateful you chose to spend your time here with me today. Tell me in the comments where in the world are you watching from, your city or country. I want to know." Note some elements of this story are fictional, added for depth and meaning. Names and locations are coincidental, but the lesson at the heart of it belongs to all of us. The suitcase hit the wet pavement with a sound I will never forget. Not a crash, not a bang. Just a dull, heavy thud, the kind of sound that means something is finished. The zipper split open on impact, and 14 months' worth of folded shirts, my old steel-toed work boots, the framed photograph of Margaret from our 25th anniversary, all of it spilled across the driveway in the pouring October rain. I stood on the front porch in my flannel shirt and stared at my life scattered across the concrete. Derek filled the doorway behind me. His thick arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set like a man who had already made his peace with what he was doing. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who coached Little League on Saturdays and talked loud at neighborhood barbecues. Tonight, under the yellow porch light with rain bouncing off the gutters, he looked like a stranger wearing my son-in-law's face. "That's everything," he said. I checked the room twice. I turned around slowly. My knees ached the way they always do in cold weather, an old souvenir from 31 years on a concrete shop floor. I looked past Derek's shoulder into the warm light of the hallway, searching for Sandra. She was there. Standing maybe 10 feet back, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on a spot somewhere near my left ear. She would not look at me directly. She had not looked at me directly in weeks. "Sandra." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Sandra, honey, just let me come inside tonight. Just tonight. I'll figure everything out in the morning, I promise." Her mouth tightened. She took one small step backward, deeper into the warmth of the house. "Dad, it's better this way," she said. Her voice was flat and rehearsed, like she had been practicing those 5 words all afternoon. "Derek and I need space. We all need space, you understand?" "Tyler's already asleep," I said. "He doesn't need anything tonight except his bed." Derek unfolded his arms and reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a folded stack of bills and held it out toward me. My stomach turned over when I saw it. $500, he said. "That covers a motel for a couple weeks and some groceries. Should be enough to get you sorted." I looked at the money. I looked at his hand. I had spent 31 years as a machinist, building things with my hands, engine parts, and hydraulic fittings and custom brackets for companies across 3 counties. I had never in my life taken money that felt the way that stack of bills felt. But it was raining, and I was 69 years old, and my daughter was standing 10 feet away, choosing her husband's patience over her father's dignity. I took the money. "Derek," I said, folding the bills into my shirt pocket without counting them. "You are going to remember tonight for a long time." He did not flinch. He just reached out and pulled the front door shut with a soft, final click. I stood on the porch and listened to the deadbolt turn. The rain came down harder. I stepped off the porch and crouched down in the driveway, my knees screaming, and started gathering my wet clothes with my bare hands. The photograph of Margaret had landed face down in a puddle. I picked it up and wiped it against my flannel shirt, but the water had already crept under the glass and fogged the image. I could still see her face blurred now, smiling at something just off camera. "I know," I said to her. "I know." I stuffed everything back into the split suitcase as best I could and wrestled it to the curb. The rain soaked through my flannel in about 45 seconds flat. I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app with fingers that had gone stiff from the cold. While I waited, I looked back at the house. The porch light clicked off. Then the living room window went dark. Then Sandra's silhouette appeared at the upstairs bedroom window. Just for a moment. She looked down at me standing in the rain with my broken suitcase, and then she reached up and pulled the curtain closed. That was the moment I understood. Not that my daughter had chosen her husband over me. I had seen that coming for months, the cold shoulders at dinner, the eye rolls when I asked about my mail, the slow migration of my belongings from the guest room to the storage closet, to that damp back room that smelled like old paint and mousetraps. I understood all of that. What I understood standing in the rain at 9:47 on a Friday night in October was something different. I understood that I had made a serious mistake 14 months ago when I sold the house Margaret and I had lived in for 33 years. We had bought that house the year Sandra started kindergarten. A 3-bedroom brick colonial on Dunmore Avenue with a cracked front walk and a garage big enough for 2 cars and a workbench. I had spent 33 years fixing that house, patching the roof, replumbing the basement, rewiring the kitchen when the original wiring started throwing breakers. Margaret used to say I loved that house more than I loved television, which was probably true. After she passed, the house felt like a museum. Every room held something I was not ready to look at. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her cardigan on the hook by the back door, the grocery list on the refrigerator in her handwriting still there 8 months after the funeral, because I could not bring myself to throw it away. Sandra had suggested I sell, said it would be good for me a fresh start, and that I should come stay with them in Rockford where she could keep an eye on me. I had resisted for months. Earl had called me 3 times that fall, inviting me to come stay at his place across town, said he had more room than he knew what to do with, and the company would do us both good. I had told him no every time. I wanted to be near my daughter. I wanted to believe that family meant something. The rideshare driver pulled up in a silver Camry. He popped the trunk without getting out. I lifted my wet suitcase and thought about where I was going. "You know any motels nearby?" I asked through the window. "Something cheap." The driver, a young guy with earbuds in, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes moved to my soaked flannel, to the broken zipper on the suitcase, to the darkness behind me where the porch light had been. "Mrs. Patterson's on Clement Street rents rooms," he said. "$45 a night, weekly rates better. She's decent people." I got in the car. As we pulled away from the curb, I did not look back at the house. I kept my eyes forward and my hand pressed flat against my shirt pocket, where $500 and a blurred photograph were the only things standing between me and nothing. I had nowhere to go, and for the first time in 69 years, I truly understood what it meant to be completely alone. The room cost $45 a night. Mrs. Patterson showed it to me herself, a stout woman in her early 70s with silver hair pinned back and the kind of no-nonsense handshake you don't see much anymore. She had looked me over on her front porch at 10:15 on a Friday night, soaking wet with a split suitcase, and had not asked a single question I did not want to answer. "Room 7's at the end of the hall," she said, handing me a key attached to a wooden tag with the number burned into it. "Bathroom's shared, but you'll mostly have it to yourself. Continental breakfast starts at 7. You look like you could use some coffee." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I could use a lot of things." She nodded once, the way people nod when they've seen enough of life to know that some stories don't need to be told out loud. Room 7 was small. A single bed with a blue and white quilt, a dresser with a lamp that tilted slightly to the left, a wooden chair by the window, and a radiator that knocked and hissed through the night like it was working twice as hard as everything else. The window looked out onto a narrow side yard, where a birch tree had dropped most of its leaves across the brown grass. I sat on the edge of the bed and emptied my shirt pocket. $500 in damp bills. I smoothed them flat on the dresser and counted them. 400s, 420s, 210s. I stared at the pile for a long time, doing math I did not want to do. Then I lay back on the quilt and looked up at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped a little like the state of Ohio, and I let myself think about the 14 months I had spent in my daughter's house. The first few weeks had been fine. Sandra had made up the guest room with fresh sheets, and Tyler had climbed into my lap every morning before breakfast, wanting stories. Derek had been polite in the careful way people are polite when they are tolerating something. By Thanksgiving, the guest room had become the problem. Derek's mother was visiting and needed the space. Could I just use the pull-out in the office for a few weeks? The office became permanent by January. By March, they needed the office for a home gym, and there was this little room off the back of the house, used to be a storage space, but they had cleared it out mostly, and it was just temporary while they figured out the long-term plan. The back room was 8 feet by 10 feet. One window that faced the fence, a bare bulb on a pull cord. The insulation in the wall had gaps, and when the wind came from the north, I could feel it through the drywall. I had put a piece of cardboard over the bottom of the door to keep the draft out. "You're not contributing, Walter," Derek had told me one evening in April, standing in the kitchen doorway with a beer in his hand. "Sandra and I are carrying all the expenses here. The least you could do is make yourself useful around the place." So I had made myself useful. I shoveled the driveway in January and February. I fixed the garbage disposal in March, the leaking faucet in the upstairs bath in April, the screen door that wouldn't close right in May. I mowed the lawn through the summer. I watched Tyler 3 afternoons a week, so Sandra could go to her book club or her yoga class or wherever she went. Derek had started calling me the live-in handyman to his friends on the phone. Not quietly. He had a carrying voice and thin walls. "At least he's good for something," he had said once, laughing. I had been in the back room. I had heard every word. Sandra never defended me. That was the part that hollowed me out the most. Not Derek's cruelty, which was loud and obvious and therefore somehow easier to hold at a distance. Sandra's silence was the thing that got into my chest and stayed there. She would hear him say something cutting, and she would look away or change the subject or suddenly find something urgent to do in another room. She had made her calculations, and I was on the wrong side of them. I sat up on the bed in room 7 and looked at my wet boots on the floor and felt the full weight of what I had let happen. I had sold Margaret's house. I had given up the one thing that was mine. The mortgage paid off completely in 2019, the property taxes current a deed with my name on it. And I had done it because I had believed that family was worth more than a piece of paper. I opened my phone and looked at my call history. The last call from Earl was 6 weeks ago. I had missed it. He had left a voicemail that I had listened to twice and not returned. "Hey, old man, it's me. Listen, I've got 3 empty bedrooms and a dog who needs someone to bother. The offer stands same as it always has. No strings, no schedule. Just come. Call me back when you stop being so stubborn." I had not called him back. I set the phone face down on the dresser and lay back on the quilt and listened to the radiator knock and hiss knock and hiss knock and hiss through the wall. Outside the window, the birch tree shook in the October wind and sent the last of its leaves scraping across the glass. I closed my eyes and told myself I would figure it out in the morning. Then my phone vibrated on the dresser. The screen lit up the ceiling for a moment before going dark again. I reached over without sitting up and turned it face up. Unknown number. Illinois area code, but not one I recognized. I set it back down. It vibrated again immediately. Same number. My thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct I had said it was a spam call, a robocall, someone selling something I did not need at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. But there was something about the persistence of it, 2 calls back to back without going to voicemail, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way I couldn't explain. I answered, "To Mr. Gaines." The voice was measured and professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who delivered difficult news for a living. "My name is James Caldwell. I'm an attorney here in Rockford. I apologize for the late hour. I've been trying to reach you for several days." He paused. "This concerns Earl Mitchell." My chest tightened so hard I nearly sat up off the bed entirely. "What about Earl?" The pause that followed lasted only 2 seconds, but I felt every one of them. "Mr. Gaines," James Caldwell said carefully, "I think it would be best if we spoke in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? I did not sleep much that night." I lay in room 7 and stared at the Ohio-shaped water stain on the ceiling and turned James Caldwell's voice over in my mind. The way he had said Earl's name. The deliberate steadiness of it, like a man carrying something fragile across a long room. By 6 in the morning, I had given up on sleep entirely. I showered in the shared bathroom down the hall, put on the least wrinkled shirt I could find in my damp suitcase, and went downstairs to Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, where she had already set out coffee and a tray of blueberry muffins that filled the whole ground floor with the kind of smell that makes you feel just briefly that things might be all right. "You look like a man who's got somewhere to be," she said, setting a mug in front of me without asking. "Got a meeting this afternoon," I said. "Attorney in town." She made a sound that was not quite a word and refilled her own mug. "You want eggs?" "No thank you, ma'am." "I'll make eggs," she said, and turned back to the stove. I sat at her kitchen table and drank 2 cups of coffee and ate the eggs she made without asking again. And I did not say much, and neither did she. And it was one of the most comfortable silences I had sat in a long time. Mrs. Patterson had a way of being present without demanding anything, which was rarer than it should have been. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I walked into the offices of Caldwell and Associates on West Jefferson Street. The receptionist, a young woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, walked me back to a corner office with tall windows that looked out onto a parking lot full of bare-limbed trees. James Caldwell stood up when I came in. He was maybe 50, trim, dark suit, the kind of careful handshake that tells you a man has thought about what his handshake communicates. He had the face of someone who had learned to keep his own reactions out of the room. "Mr. Gaines," he said, "please sit down." I sat. He sat. He folded his hands on the desk. "I'll be direct with you," he said. "Earl Mitchell passed away on October 3rd. Cardiac arrest. It was fast. He did not suffer. The room did not spin the way I might have expected. It just went very still, the way a room goes still in the moment after something irreversible has happened. And I sat in the stillness and breathed through it. Earl Mitchell, 42 years. We had met in the break room of the same machine shop in 1982, both of us 27, both of us eating sandwiches over a parts catalog and arguing about the wrong way to torque a manifold bolt. He had laughed at something I said, and I had laughed at something he said, and that had been the beginning of it, the way most real friendships begin without any intention at all. He had left the trades eventually and moved into the business side of things, Gas stations first, then property, then a portfolio that had grown into something neither of us had ever imagined when we were eating those sandwiches in 1982. He had never married. Said he was too stubborn and too particular and too fond of his own company. I had told him those were all very good reasons to get a dog. I didn't know, I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Nobody told me. Caldwell nodded slowly. There were some complications with locating you. Your previous address was no longer current. He paused. I understand you recently relocated. You could say that. Caldwell opened a folder on his desk and looked at it for a moment. Mr. Mitchell named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate, he said. That includes 8 fuel service stations across 3 counties, 7 commercial real estate properties, and a managed investment portfolio. The total assessed value as of his last annual review is approximately $22.4 million. I heard the number. I understood the number. And yet it landed somewhere outside of me like a sound coming through a wall, something I knew was real but could not quite bring into the same room where I was sitting. Earl, I said. Not to Caldwell. Just to the air in front of me. He was very specific in his instructions. Caldwell continued. He also left something for you directly. He reached to the side of the desk and lifted a wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox, sanded smooth, and finished with something dark. He set it on the desk between us. My name was written on the top in Earl's handwriting, the same loose, unhurried print I had seen on birthday cards, and the occasional letter for 4 decades. Walter. Just that. No last name. As if there were only one Walter in the world who might need to open this box. He asked that you open it privately, Caldwell said, when you're ready. I looked at the box. My throat tightened until swallowing took real effort. I pressed my hand flat against the top of it, feeling the grain of the wood under my palm, and I could not have explained why that simple act, just touching it, made my eyes burn the way they did. Why didn't he tell me, I asked, that he was sick? Why didn't he say something? Caldwell's expression shifted not much, just enough. He didn't want you to come to him out of obligation, he said carefully. Earl was very clear on that point. I sat with that for a moment. He called me, I said. 6 weeks ago. I didn't call him back. Caldwell said nothing. He did not have to. I picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked. I held it in both hands and stared at my name in Earl's handwriting and felt something crack open in the center of my chest. Not break exactly, but open the way a window opens, letting in air that is colder and more real than what was in the room before. I'll need some time, I told Caldwell. Of course. He stood and extended his hand. Take all the time you need, Mr. Gaines. I'll be in touch Monday regarding the formal transfer proceedings. He paused. There is one more thing. I looked up. Earl had a dog, Caldwell said. A Labrador, 13 years old. He left specific instructions about him as well. He hesitated, as if considering how much to say. He asked that you be the one to meet him first. I carried the box out into the October afternoon and sat in my car in the parking lot with it on the passenger seat. The bare trees in the lot moved in the wind. A woman walked past, pushing a stroller. Somewhere down the block, somebody's radio was playing an old country song I half recognized. I sat there for a long time, just staring at my name written in Earl's handwriting. I was afraid of what I might find inside. The parking lot outside Caldwell's office had emptied out by the time I finally started the engine. I drove back to Mrs. Patterson's with the wooden box on the passenger seat, buckled in with the seatbelt the way you'd secure something you were afraid might slide off if you took a corner too fast. which was ridiculous. I knew it was ridiculous. But I did it anyway. Back in room 7, I set the box on the dresser under the tilting lamp and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long time. The radiator knocked and hissed. Rain tapped the window again, lighter than the night before, more of a suggestion than a storm. I was afraid of what Earl had written, not because I thought it would be bad, because I knew it would be true, and Earl's truth had always had a way of getting past whatever walls I'd built around the parts of myself I didn't want to examine too closely. I got up, pulled the wooden chair to the dresser, and sat down in front of the box. I lifted the lid. The first thing inside was an envelope cream-colored my name on the front in Earl's unhurried print. Beneath it, I could see the edge of something else. Papers, photographs maybe, but I didn't look yet. I opened the envelope carefully, the way you open something you know you can only open once. The letter was 3 pages, written by hand on yellow legal pad paper. The lines slightly uneven, the way handwriting gets when a man is tired. Walter, if you're opening this box, it means they finally did what I always feared they would. I'm sorry I wasn't there when it happened. I want you to know I tried to be. I had to put the letter down. I pressed both hands flat on the dresser and breathed through my nose until the burning behind my eyes settled enough that I could see the words clearly again. You turned me down 3 times. Fall of last year Christmas, and once more in March when I called and you didn't pick up. I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I knew. I've known Sandra and that husband of hers for long enough to see which direction things were headed. I didn't want to be right. I very much wanted to be wrong. But you always did love that girl more than was probably good for either of you. My chest tightened until drawing a full breath required actual effort. I kept reading. In the bottom of this box, you'll find every letter you ever sent me. I kept them all. I know you thought I was terrible at correspondence, and I was, but I read every single one of them. Twice usually, sometimes more. There's a photograph in there too, the one Jimmy Kowalski took at the shop in '82. You've got grease on your face and you're laughing at something I said. I kept it in my desk drawer for 40 years. I stopped reading. I reached into the box and lifted out the bundle of letters held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. There were more than I'd remembered writing. Dozens of them, spanning 4 decades, some on notebook paper, some on the back of parts invoices from the shop, a few on actual stationery that Margaret had probably put in front of me with a pen and a look that meant she was tired of me not keeping in touch. Earl had kept every single one. My hands were shaking. Not the fine tremor of cold or caffeine, but something deeper. Something that started in the sternum and worked its way outward. Beneath the letters was the photograph. Black and white, 4 inches by 6, slightly curled at the corners. 2 young men in work shirts standing in front of a lathe, both grinning at something off camera. I recognized the shop, recognized the machine, recognized the particular way Earl stood with his weight on his left foot. I barely recognized myself. 27 years old, jaw-sharp hair, dark grease on my left cheek, exactly where Earl had described it. I turned the photograph over. On the back in Earl's handwriting, the day it started. Keep going. I had to put the photograph down on the dresser and press the back of my hand against my mouth, because the sound that was trying to come out of me was not one I wanted to make in a room with thin walls. I sat like that for a minute. Then I went back to the letter. There's one more thing in the box. Bottom left corner wrapped in the blue cloth. That's the watch I was wearing the day you pulled me out of that drainage ditch off Route 9 in '87. You probably remember it better than I do. I only remember the cold and then your voice telling me to hold on. Open the back cover. I found the cloth bundle and unwrapped it carefully. A watch, old-fashioned round face, the kind that wound manually. The crystal was scratched, but the hands still moved. I turned it over and found the small notch for the case back pried it open with my thumbnail. Engraved on the inside of the cover in letters so small, I had to tilt the lamp to read them. Thank you for saving my life that year. Everything after was because of you. The drainage ditch off Route 9. February 1987. A late afternoon in February, temperature dropping fast, Earl's truck in the ditch at a bad angle. The door jammed, water coming in from somewhere underneath. I had been 2 minutes behind him on the same road. I had not done anything heroic. I had broken the passenger window with a tire iron and pulled him out and sat with him on the frozen roadside until the ambulance came. I had never thought of it as saving his life. I had thought of it as being in the right place. Earl had spent 38 years thinking otherwise. I sat in the wooden chair in room 7 with the watch in one hand and the letter in the other, and I cried. Not the polite, controlled kind of crying you do at funerals when you're trying to hold it together for everyone else. The ugly kind, shoulders shaking, chest heaving, the kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know was that full until it starts emptying out. I cried for Earl. I cried for the 3 phone calls I hadn't returned. I cried for the photograph of 2 27-year-olds who had no idea what 42 years would look like from the other end of them. I was still sitting there, the letter in my lap and the watch pressed between my palms, when I heard something in the hallway outside my door. A sound I was not expecting. Soft, low, a single quiet exhale pressed against the bottom of the door. I stood up and crossed the room and opened the door. And then I saw him. He was a yellow Labrador, old enough that his muzzle had gone almost entirely white, and his movements had that careful, deliberate quality of a dog that had learned to be gentle with its own joints. He was standing in the hallway outside room 7 with his tail moving in a slow, steady arc. Not the frantic wagging of a young dog, but something more measured, more certain, the way you'd greet someone you'd been expecting for a while. He looked up at me, and something in his dark eyes was so steady and so present that my throat closed all over again. "Hey, buddy," I said. My voice came out rough. "Hey there." He walked forward and pressed his entire head against my leg, just leaned into me with the full weight of his skull, the way dogs do when they've decided you're theirs. And I reached down and put my hand on the back of his neck, and stood there in the hallway of a boarding house in Rockford, Illinois, not moving, not speaking, just holding on. James Caldwell appeared at the end of the hall, coat still on his briefcase in one hand, and a leash in the other. He looked at the dog pressed against my leg, and something in his carefully composed expression shifted just slightly. "I'm sorry to come back this evening," Caldwell said. "Earl's instructions were specific. He wanted Buddy brought to you personally and introduced the same day you received the box." He paused. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, "The dog will know. Don't let anyone else do this part." I looked down at Buddy, who had not moved from his position against my leg. His tail was still going slow and even. "How old is he?" I asked. 12, Caldwell said. "Earl got him as a puppy the year after the 2 of you went fishing up in Wisconsin. Said you'd told him he needed something that would be glad to see him when he came home." I remembered that conversation. A Saturday morning in 2011, Earl's back porch coffee going cold between us. I had told him a man needed at least one living thing in his life that loved him without condition or agenda. Earl had laughed and said that sounded like something you'd stitch on a pillow. 6 weeks later, he had called me to say he'd gotten a dog and named him Buddy because he needed to be reminded every day what the point was. "Come in," I told Caldwell. "Both of you." We sat in room 7, me on the edge of the bed, and Caldwell on the wooden chair with Buddy lying across my feet, with his chin on his front paws and his eyes tracking every movement in the room. Mrs. Patterson had appeared at some point and set a tray outside the door with 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of shortbread cookies without anyone asking her to, which I was beginning to understand was simply how she operated. "I want to go over the estate structure," Caldwell said, opening his briefcase on his knee. "I know today has been a great deal to absorb, but Earl was specific that you understand exactly what you've inherited before we proceed." "Go ahead," I said. "The 8 fuel service stations are operating businesses," Caldwell explained, setting a folder on the bed beside me. "Earl retained a general manager named Phil Dawson, who has run day-to-day operations for 11 years. The stations are profitable. Combined annual net revenue is approximately $1.4 million. You don't need to do anything with them immediately. Phil knows the business." I know Phil," I said. "Earl introduced us at his 4th of July party maybe 5 years ago. Good man." "He is," Caldwell agreed. "The commercial properties are a mix of small retail and warehouse spaces, 7 buildings across Rockford and 2 neighboring counties. 4 are currently leased with long-term tenants. 3 have vacancies that the property management company has been working to fill." He turned a page. "The investment portfolio is managed by a fiduciary advisor at First Midwest. Current value is approximately $14.6 million diversified across equities, municipal bonds, and a real estate investment trust. The advisor's name is Carol Birch. She's excellent. She'll want to meet with you in the next 30 days. I listened to all of this, the way you listen to a doctor explaining a diagnosis you weren't expecting. You hear the words and you understand them individually, but the full weight of them takes longer to arrive. Earl built all of this himself," I said. "From nothing. From a single gas station on the east side of town," Caldwell confirmed. "He bought it in 1994 with a small business loan and the money he'd saved working trades. Took him 3 years to pay off the loan and another 2 to buy the second station." He paused. "He told me once that he never would have had the nerve to sign that first loan if a friend hadn't shown him that some things were worth the risk." I looked down at Buddy. Buddy looked back up at me. "He wrote that in the letter too," I said quietly. "About the ditch." "I know," Caldwell said. "He told me the full story. He said you never once brought it up again after that day. He said that was the most decent thing anyone had ever done for him, saving his life, and then never making him feel like he owed you for it." I had no answer for that. My eyes were burning again, and I was getting tired of fighting it, so I pressed the back of my wrist against them and just let them burn. "What do I need to do first?" I asked. "Nothing this weekend," Caldwell said firmly. "Monday, we begin the formal probate process. Under Illinois probate law, the court will appoint a representative to validate the will and confirm the transfer of assets to you as the named beneficiary. Because Earl's estate is above the simplified transfer threshold, we'll go through supervised administration, which typically takes 6 to 9 months to complete. In the meantime, the operating businesses continue as normal, and I serve as the estate's legal representative. 6 to 9 months, I repeated. "The assets are protected throughout," Caldwell assured me. "Nothing can be transferred, sold, or encumbered without court approval during that period. Your interests are fully secured." He closed the folder. "What I need from you right now is simply a contact number and a mailing address." I looked around room 7. The tilting lamp, the blue and white quilt, the water stain on the ceiling shaped like Ohio. "Room 7, I said. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house on Clement Street. I expect I'll be here a while." Caldwell nodded, wrote it down without comment. He buttoned his coat and picked up his briefcase. He looked at Buddy, still lying across my feet. Earl said something else, Caldwell told me at the door. He said, "Tell Walter the dog already knows he's a good man. The dog is never wrong about that." After Caldwell left, I sat for a long time with Buddy's warm weight across my feet and Earl's letter on the bed beside me and the watch in my hand. The radiator knocked. The rain had stopped. Through the window, the birch tree stood completely still in the cold night air. Buddy lifted his head after a while and rested his chin on my knee and looked up at me with those steady, dark eyes. "You knew him 42 years, I told him. "Me too." His tail moved once, slow and certain. I reached over and turned off the tilting lamp. In the dark, I could still feel the weight of the watch in my palm and the warmth of the old dog against my leg, and for the first time since standing in the rain outside Sandra's house with a broken suitcase, I did not feel entirely alone. The next morning, I woke to my phone ringing on the dresser. Sandra's name on the screen. I stared at her name and already knew. Word travels fast in Rockford. I let it ring. Sandra's name pulsed on the screen 3 times before the call dropped to voicemail. I set the phone face down on the dresser and looked at Buddy, who had raised his head at the sound and was watching me with his ears forward. "Not yet," I told him. I took him outside for a slow walk around the block in the cold Sunday morning air, both of us moving at the pace that suited our joints, which was not fast, but was steady. The neighborhood around Mrs. Patterson's was the kind of Rockford block that had been working class for 60 years and didn't apologize for it. Aluminum siding, chain-link fences, a few jack-o'-lanterns still on front porches going soft at the corners. Buddy stopped at every third tree, and I waited for him without hurrying, and we got along just fine. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket twice more while we walked. Sandra both times. Then a text Dad I heard about Mr. Mitchell. "Can we talk? I'm so sorry." I read it standing on the sidewalk with Buddy sitting on my feet. She was sorry. 2 weeks ago, she had stood at an upstairs window and pulled the curtain closed, while I stood in the rain with a split suitcase. Now she was sorry. I put the phone back in my pocket, and we finished our walk. At 11 that morning, I was sitting in Mrs. Patterson's small front parlor, reading a newspaper she had left out when I heard a car pull up outside. I knew the sound of that engine, a 2019 Chevy Tahoe that Derek had leased and talked about constantly the first 6 months, as if the size of a vehicle were a personality trait. I did not get up from the chair. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the kitchen, gave me a look that asked a question without words, and I shook my head slightly. She went to the door anyway because it was her house, and she was not the kind of woman who let other people's drama prevent her from answering her own door. I heard Sandra's voice in the entryway, bright and slightly too warm, the particular social register she used with people she wanted something from. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm Sandra Harmon Walter's daughter. Is he available?" Mrs. Patterson did not answer immediately. I heard the pause, the kind of pause that belongs to a woman who has seen enough to know exactly what kind of visit this was. "I'll let him know you're here," she said. She appeared in the parlor doorway and looked at me. I folded the newspaper and stood up. Sandra was on the front porch with a casserole dish covered in foil and a smile that had clearly taken some effort to construct. She was dressed nicely, hair done, the kind of put-together that takes 40 minutes on a Sunday morning and is designed to be noticed. In her other hand, she held a smaller container, something wrapped in plastic. "Dad." Her voice cracked slightly on the word, which might have been genuine and might have been rehearsed. With Sandra lately, I had trouble telling. "I heard about Earl. I'm so sorry. I know how much he meant to you." "Thank you," I said. "I made your favorite." She held out the casserole dish. Beef stew with the little potatoes, Mom's recipe. I looked at the dish. Then I looked at my daughter. My wife Margaret had made that beef stew every winter Sunday for 30 years. It had been the smell of our kitchen from November through March, rich and slow and particular, the kind of meal that meant the week was over and everyone was home. Sandra had eaten it at our table hundreds of times. She had never once cooked it herself. Not in my memory, not in the 14 months I had lived under her roof, not in any of the holidays I could account for. She had told her mother once, laughing, that she didn't have the patience for anything that took more than 45 minutes. "You made this," I said. "Of course." She smiled wider. "I called Aunt Rose for the recipe. I wanted to do something." She pushed the dish slightly toward me. "Can I come in?" "We can sit on the porch," I said. Her smile held, but something behind it recalculated. She sat in one of Mrs. Patterson's porch chairs and set the casserole dish on the small table between us and tucked her hands in her lap like a woman in a waiting room. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Are you okay?" "This place is nice. It seems really nice. Mrs. Patterson seems wonderful. But Dad, you shouldn't be in a boarding house. You could stay with us. We want you to come home." "You and Derek want me to come home," I said. "Yes." She nodded, holding eye contact with the focused intensity of someone making a case. "We talked about it. Derek feels terrible about the way things ended. He really does. He's been worried about you." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I already knew. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. "Derek." I answered it. "Hey." Derek's voice came out loose and casual, the register he used when he was trying to sound like a man without an agenda. "So rough week, huh? Listen, I heard about your friend Earl. That's tough. Good guy by the sound of it." A half-beat pause short enough that a person not paying attention might miss it entirely. "So how much did he actually leave? Not how are you holding up? Not are you okay?" Not even a full minute of condolence before the question he'd actually called to ask. How much did he actually leave? I felt something settle in my chest, cold and certain, the way a machine part settles into its housing when you finally got the tolerances right. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "The lawyers are still sorting it out." Right. More casual. "Well, listen, if you need any help navigating all that, I'm happy to sit down with you. I know how these estate things can get complicated, especially for someone who hasn't dealt with that kind of paperwork before. Sandra and I just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll be in touch." I hung up. Sandra was watching me from across the small table, her hands still folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, that was Derek," I said. "I know," she said. I looked at the casserole dish sitting between us. The foil was perfectly crimped around the edges. The dish was one I didn't recognize, new, purchased specifically for this visit. Margaret's recipe and a brand new dish carried across town on a Sunday morning. Not because my daughter missed her father, but because a neighbor had said something that made the calculation change overnight. I reached into the pocket of my coat, the same coat I'd been wearing the night Derek threw my suitcase into the rain, and I found what I'd put there that morning before the walk. A bread roll, hard now, the crust gone stiff from 2 days in a coat pocket. I had taken it from the gas station the night of the eviction, the only food I'd bought before finding Mrs. Patterson's. I set it on the table next to the casserole dish and looked at it for a moment. "The night you locked me out," I said, keeping my voice even, "this was my dinner." Sandra's face went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, shame, a flash of something defensive, and then a careful retreat back to neutral. "Dad," she started. "I'm keeping it," I said. I'm not sure why yet, but I think I'll know when the time comes. I stood up, picked up the casserole dish, and handed it back to her. Tell Derek I'll be in touch about the estate, I said. That's what you came to find out. Now you know. Sandra stood holding the dish against her chest, her eyes suddenly bright with something that might have been tears and might have been anger, and was probably some complicated mixture of both. That's not fair, she said, her voice tightening. No, I agreed. It really isn't. I went back inside. Through the parlor window, I watched her carry the casserole dish back to the Tahoe. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine, and then she drove away. Buddy came and stood beside me at the window. I know, I told him. I'm keeping the bread roll. Sandra called Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday before 8 in the morning, which told me Derek had put her up to it on a schedule. I answered on Thursday. Dad. Her voice was 3 notes higher than normal, the register she used when she needed something. I just really want a chance to sit down together, as a family. Tyler has been asking about you. That last part was the only thing in the sentence I believed completely. What time? I said. 6 o'clock, she answered immediately, as if she'd had it ready for days. I'm making pot roast. I told her I would come. After I hung up, I looked at Buddy and said, she's making pot roast. And Buddy thumped his tail once against the floor, which was the appropriate level of enthusiasm for the situation. I put the bread roll in my coat pocket that morning without deciding to. The way you carry certain things, not because you have a plan, but because they belong with you for reasons you haven't worked out yet. The house smelled like pot roast and artificial apple from a plug-in air freshener in the entryway. The dining table was set with the good placemats, the holiday ones, and candles were lit, which was so far beyond a normal Sunday dinner that it would have been funny if it wasn't working so hard at something. Derek met me at the door with a handshake and a grin that showed every tooth. Dad. He squeezed my hand a beat too long. Really glad you came. Beer, water, I've got that bourbon you used to like. Water's fine, I said. Tyler appeared from the hallway. 9 years old, dark-haired like his father Sandra's eyes. He looked at me with the careful expression of a child who has been told what to say and is trying to remember it. Hi, Grandpa. Then genuine feeling broke through entirely. Did you bring the dog? Buddy's home tonight, I said. But he says hi. Tyler's face fell with real disappointment, which was the most honest thing that happened in that house all evening. Dinner was good. Sandra could cook when she applied herself, and the pot roast was tender. Derek kept his bourbon glass full through most of the meal, which loosened him up in a way that was both more pleasant and more revealing than his sober performance. These estate attorneys, Derek said 15 minutes in reaching for the breadbasket. I've heard some of those firms can really drag things out. If you ever want a second set of eyes on anything, Sandra and I are happy to help. I appreciate that, I said in the tone of a man who appreciates things without acting on the appreciation. Sandra brought out pie after dinner store-bought, but transferred to one of her own dishes. Derek cut generous slices. Tyler got ice cream on his, and was briefly and completely happy in the uncomplicated way children are happy. Watching him eat it was the best 3 minutes of the meal. Derek leaned back with his bourbon and started talking about property management, how he'd always had a good instinct for real estate, how a friend at his golf club had done very well with commercial properties. I let him talk. After the plates were cleared, I reached into my coat pocket. I set the bread roll on the table in front of my plate. Hard, slightly flattened the crust, gone the color of old paper. It sat on the white tablecloth next to the good placemats and the melted candles looking exactly like what it was. Derek stopped talking. Sandra looked at the bread roll and then at me, her expression going very careful. Tyler looked at it with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child. "What's that?" "My dinner from the night I left," I said. "Gas station on Clement Street, bread roll and a bottle of water. Ate it alone in room 7. I turned it in my fingers. Funny thing, it still tastes better than anything on this table tonight. I said it quietly, no heat in it. Just the way you say something that is simply true. The refrigerator hum from the kitchen became audible. Derek set his bourbon glass down. The small sound of glass on tablecloth was very loud. Sandra's jaw tightened, and her eyes went bright the way eyes go when tears are fighting to stay put. She looked at the bread roll. She looked at the candles she had lit specifically for this evening. "Dad," she said, her voice careful and low. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It really isn't." I put the bread roll back in my coat pocket and stood up. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "The pot roast was very good." Tyler had followed me to the entryway without my noticing. He looked up at me with Sandra's eyes and his father's dark hair, and an expression that belonged to neither of them. His small hand closed around 2 of my fingers. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "can I talk to you outside?" The night air outside Sandra's house was cold and still smelling of dead leaves and chimney smoke from houses down the block. Tyler stood on the front walk in his socks. He had followed me out without stopping for shoes, which told me whatever he needed to say felt too urgent to wait. "Hey!" I said, crouching down to his level, my knees complaining the whole way. "You're going to freeze out here, bud." "I'm okay," he said. He was not okay. He was shivering, and not only from the cold. His small hands were twisted together in front of him, fingers knotted the way hands go when a person is carrying something too heavy. "I'm right here," I said. "Take your time." He looked up at me with Sandra's eyes, and in them I saw something that broke my heart clean down the middle. Not sadness exactly. Something older. The particular discomfort of a child placed in the middle of something adult and told to stand there. "Grandpa," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Dad said something." He stopped, his bottom lip pressed tight. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," I said. Tyler swallowed hard. His eyes filled, and the tears did not fall, but they were right there at the edge, and the effort of holding them made his chin tremble. "Dad said if you don't give them the money, I'm not supposed to call you Grandpa anymore." The words landed the way a dropped wrench lands on concrete. That particular weight, that particular sound. I kept my face steady because the last thing this child needed was to watch his grandfather fall apart in the front yard. "Did he say that to you directly?" I asked. "Or did you hear him?" "He said it to Mom." Tyler said the words coming faster, now spilling the way words do once a child starts. "In the kitchen before you came. He said if you didn't sign the papers, you weren't really family, and I shouldn't call you Grandpa. He said you were being difficult." His voice cracked on the last word. Mom didn't say anything back. She just kept stirring the pot roast. I breathed in through my nose. The cold air went all the way down. Sandra had stood at the stove while her husband told their 9-year-old son that his grandfather's place in the family depended on a signature. And she had not said one word. I put both hands on Tyler's small shoulders. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "That took real courage." One tear broke loose and tracked down his left cheek. "But Grandpa," he said, voice barely holding, "are you going to stop being my grandpa?" My chest seized so hard I had to press my back teeth together. 9 years old, standing in his socks on a cold driveway, terrified that adults had the power to revoke something that should have been unconditional. Tyler. I pulled him into a hug. He came immediately, both arms around my neck, face pressed against my shoulder, shaking the full-body shaking of a child who has held too much for too long. Nobody can make me stop being your grandpa, not your dad, not anyone. That is not something that gets taken away. He nodded against my shoulder. A sound escaped him that was not quite a word and not quite a sob, but somewhere between the two. You are a good kid, I said, holding on. None of what the grown-ups are fighting about has anything to do with you, not one bit. That's our mess, not yours. He pulled back and wiped his face with his sweater sleeve. Eyes red, nose running, looking simultaneously younger and older than 9. Is it about the money? He asked. 9 years old. They pick up everything. It's about a lot of things, I said honestly. But you and I are going to be just fine, okay? He nodded, less certain than I would have liked, but more settled than 60 seconds ago. I stood up and looked at the front door. Through the narrow window, I could see the hallway light and the edge of Derek's shadow moving in the kitchen. Go back inside and put your shoes on, I told Tyler. And don't tell your dad we talked. Not tonight. Can you do that? He nodded with the gravity of a child who understands that some things need protecting. He padded back up the walk in his socks and slipped through the door without a sound. I stood alone in the cold driveway and looked up. The clouds had cleared. Sharp October stars, the kind you only get after a cold front moves through. I dialed. Caldwell picked up on the second ring. James, I said, turning away from the house. I know it's Sunday, but I think it's time we set a trap. The pause on his end was brief and completely unsurprised. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Come to the office tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Bring Buddy. I looked back at the house one last time, kitchen light on. Somewhere inside, Sandra was washing the pot roast pan, and Derek was finishing his bourbon, and Tyler was putting his shoes back on and not saying a word, because a 9-year-old boy had just shown more integrity than either of his parents. I started the engine and drove back through the cold October night toward room 7 and whatever came next. Before I tell you what I decided to do next, comment the number 9. So I know you're still with me. Because what comes next changes everything. Quick note. The story ahead contains some fictional elements built for reflection and meaning. If that is not for you, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. Caldwell's office at 8 in the morning had a different quality than the afternoon. The light was thin and gray and honest, without any warmth to soften the edges of things. Buddy curled under my chair and went back to sleep within 2 minutes, which I respected. Caldwell had 2 coffees ready and a yellow legal pad in front of him. He looked like a man who had not wasted his Sunday evening. Tell me everything, he said. Start from when Sandra first called. I told him all of it. The casserole dish. Derek's phone call asking how much Earl left before asking how I was doing. The pot roast dinner with the holiday placemats and the store-bought pie. Tyler standing in his socks on the cold front walk telling me what his father had said in the kitchen. Caldwell wrote without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his pen. They've already filed, he said. Filed what? Shakti, a guardianship petition. He turned the legal pad toward me. Derek and Sandra filed 4 days ago, the same week Sandra showed up at Mrs. Patterson's with the casserole dish. Under the Illinois Probate Act Article 11, a family member can petition the court to appoint a guardian for an adult they claim lacks capacity to make responsible financial decisions. It requires a physician's evaluation and a court hearing. He paused. The petition alone means nothing, but it tells us exactly what they're planning. I set my coffee cup down carefully. They're going to say I'm incompetent, I said. They're going to try to build that case, Caldwell said. They need you confused, overwhelmed, dependent on their guidance. That's what the dinners are for. That's what every offer to help is for. They're building a record. He held my gaze. So we build a better one. He reached into his desk drawer and set a small device between us. Matte black, no larger than a thick pen. Illinois is a one-party consent state for audio recording, he said. You can legally record any conversation you participate in without notifying the other party. This device runs 14 hours continuously and transfers automatically to encrypted cloud storage. Every lie they tell you, every document they put in front of you, every conversation pressuring you to sign anything, goes directly into a protected evidentiary file. He leaned forward. We are not entrapping them. We are documenting what they would do regardless. I turned the device in my fingers. Lighter than it looked. The guardianship petition, I asked. And already responded to on your behalf. I've engaged Dr. Patricia Waverly at Rockford Medical, one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Northern Illinois, for an independent cognitive assessment. Her evaluation will establish on record that you are fully competent. He paused. I've also notified the probate court. Under Illinois law, any guardianship petition filed against a named beneficiary during active probate proceedings must be disclosed to the estate judge. He is now aware that Sandra and Derek are attempting to establish legal control over you simultaneously with your inheritance. That fact alone is significant. I looked at Buddy asleep under the chair, gray muzzle on his front paws, breathing in the uncomplicated rhythm of a dog who had decided he was exactly where he should be. Earl would have liked you, I told Caldwell. He did, Caldwell said, allowing a small, real smile. He was my client for 11 years. He started building this estate structure 4 years ago specifically to make it difficult to challenge. A pause. He told me once that he had a friend who was too decent for his own good, and that decency was going to need some legal architecture around it eventually. My throat tightened. He said exactly that. Caldwell confirmed. I slipped the recording device into my breast pocket directly over the left side of my chest. What do I do first? I asked. You call Sandra, Caldwell said. You tell her you've been thinking, that maybe she was right about you not handling all of this alone. You tell her you want to come home. He held my gaze. Men like Derek move fast when they think the window is open. That's when they get sloppy. That's when they show you exactly what they came for. And whatever they put in front of me to sign, take it. Tell them you need a few days. Bring it here. Do not sign anything regardless of what they say about deadlines or urgency. Every document they produce is evidence. Let them produce as many as they want. I nodded. Caldwell's tone shifted slightly. Are you sure you want to do this, Walter? It means going back into that house. It means letting them believe they have you. I thought about Tyler and his socks. I thought about Earl's letter on yellow legal pad paper. I thought about 31 years of building things meant to hold. I'm sure, I said. I called Sandra from the parking lot while Buddy worked his way along the base of every bare-limbed tree on the sidewalk. She answered on the first ring, "Sweetheart." I said, letting some tiredness into my voice that was not entirely false. I've been doing a lot of thinking. You might have been right about me not being alone with all of this. The sound she made was quick and completely unguarded. Pure relief, the involuntary kind that escapes before you can shape it. Oh, Dad, she said. I'm so glad you said that. I looked at Caldwell through the office window. He was writing on his legal pad and did not look up. I hung up, and stood in the cold parking lot with Buddy on my feet and the recording device warm against my chest. The trap was open. Now we waited. Sandra had cleaned the guest room. Not the storage room where I had spent 14 months listening to wind come through the drywall. The actual guest room second-floor window facing the street. Fresh towels on the foot of the bed, a small lamp on the nightstand, 3 grocery store carnations in a vase, pink and slightly wilted. The kind of gesture that costs $4 and is meant to communicate considerably more. I stood in the doorway with my overnight bag and understood exactly what the carnations represented. An investment, a down payment on my goodwill. "We wanted you to be comfortable," Sandra said behind me. "Derek picked up those cookies you like from the bakery on Elm." "That's very thoughtful," I said. I let some slowness into my movements as I set my bag down. Not exaggerated, just the natural deceleration of a tired man grateful for a soft place to land. Caldwell had been specific. Don't perform incompetence, perform exhaustion and gratitude. Men like Derek fill in the rest themselves. Derek appeared in the hallway in a fleece vest over a collared shirt, the weekend uniform of a Midwestern man who wants to look relaxed while remaining in charge. "Good to have you back, Dad," he said. "This is how it should be. Family taking care of family." "I appreciate it," I said. "All this estate business, Derek, I'll be honest with you, it's more than I expected. Makes my head swim a little." His shoulders relaxed by a fraction. Small, but I caught it. "You shouldn't have to figure it all out alone," he said. "Why don't we sit down after dinner and I can take a look at some of the paperwork with you?" "That would be a real help," I said. The recording device sat in my breast pocket, doing its job quietly and without complaint. Dinner was chicken and rice, simple and good, Sandra's default when she was not performing. Tyler came to the table still in his school clothes, and when he saw me, he went very still for just a moment before his face broke into something genuine. "You're back?" he said. "I'm back," I confirmed. He looked at me with those careful eyes, the ones that had stood on the cold front walk in their socks, and told me the truth. Then he reached over and poured himself a glass of milk with great concentration, his way of letting the moment pass without making it bigger than it needed to be. 9 years old, and already more grace than both his parents combined. After dinner, Tyler went upstairs for homework. Sandra cleared the table. Derek refilled his water glass and settled into the living room chair with the posture of a man who had been waiting for the room to clear. "Tell me where things stand with the estate," he said. I sat across from him, held my coffee mug with both hands, and looked at him with the expression of a man grateful someone was willing to take an interest. "James Caldwell is handling most of it," I said slowly. "Nice fellow, very thorough, but there's a lot of paperwork. The stations alone have their own documentation, then the properties, the investment accounts." I shook my head. "I'm not ashamed to say it's a lot." Derek leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who has been handed an opening and intends to walk through it. "Has Caldwell mentioned power of attorney?" he asked. "For managing the estate day to day, he mentioned it," I said vaguely. "It's worth thinking about," Derek said, spreading his hands in a gesture of pure reasonableness. "Having someone you trust handle the operational stuff so you're not buried in paperwork every week. It doesn't take anything away from you. It just gives someone the authority to act quickly when something comes up with the properties or the stations." "That makes a lot of sense," I said. I hadn't thought about it quite that way. The tension in his shoulders released visibly. "I can put together an overview," he said. "Nothing binding. Just so you can make an informed decision." "I'd like that," I said. "Derek, I have to say I'm glad Sandra talked me into coming back." He smiled, the most relaxed smile I had seen on his face in 2 years. the smile of a man who believes the difficult part is behind him. Sandra appeared in the doorway, looked at Derek's expression, and then at mine, and something in her own face softened with a relief that was almost painful to watch. She wanted to believe it badly enough that she was not looking carefully at what she was actually seeing. I said goodnight and went upstairs. I lay on the guest room bed in the dark, with the carnations wilting in their vase, and Buddy breathing steadily on the rug beside me. I had arranged with Mrs. Patterson to bring him along, and Sandra had agreed immediately, the easy accommodation of a woman who needed everything smooth. Derek's voice came low through the wall on the phone in the bedroom down the hall. I could not make out the words, but I did not need to. The recording device on the nightstand was doing that work. I pressed my hand flat on the nightstand in the dark and thought about Earl writing 3 pages on yellow legal pad paper, a man who had spent 42 years paying attention and left behind something more than money. He had left behind the truth, carefully arranged, patiently waiting. The floorboard in the hallway creaked once. Then the house went quiet. They'll move faster now, I thought. Derek's already making calls. A week passed. Derek brought coffee to the kitchen table every morning with the consistency of a man running a campaign, and each morning he sat down across from me with his own mug and talked about something casual, the weather, a game, he'd watched a neighbor's fence that needed replacing, and each morning I could feel him measuring the distance between where we were and where he needed me to be. On Thursday morning, he came to the table with a manila folder. "Dad," he said, setting it down between our coffee mugs with the careful casualness of a man who had rehearsed the gesture. "I had my buddy Ray put together that overview I mentioned, the one about managing the estate going forward. Ray handles business law downtown. Sharp guy." I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it. "That was fast," I said. "And Ray's efficient," Derek said, opening it himself and turning it to face me. "Take a look. It's not complicated, I promise. Just an overview of what a durable power of attorney would look like in your situation. A durable power of attorney in Illinois is a legal document that grants another person, called the agent, the authority to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of the person signing, called the principal. Unlike a standard power of attorney, the durable version remains in effect, even if the principal becomes incapacitated. It is one of the most powerful documents in estate law precisely because it does not require the principal to be declared incompetent before the agent can act. It requires only a signature, a notary, and a witness. What Derek had put in front of me was not an overview. It was the document itself, 12 pages already tabbed at the signature lines, with small yellow stickers, the kind that say, "Sign here," in red letters. I picked it up and held it with both hands and made my eyes move across the first page at the speed of a man reading something that required genuine effort. "It looks thorough," I said. "Ray's thorough," Derek said. He leaned back in his chair with his coffee mug and watched me read with the patient expression of a man who had already decided how this morning was going to end. Basically, what it does is give Sandra and me the authority to handle the day-to-day stuff. Sign off on transactions, manage the property accounts, deal with the stations if anything urgent comes up. You'd still be in charge of everything. We'd just be able to act quickly when you need us to." "Yeah, what kind of transactions?" I asked. "Oh, routine stuff," Derek said, waving a hand. "Paying vendors, renewing leases, moving funds between accounts if the cash flow needs balancing. Nothing major." I turned to page 4. The language there was considerably less routine than Derek's description. The document granted full authority over all financial accounts, real property business interests, and investment portfolios. It contained no dollar limit on transactions. It contained no requirement for the principal's knowledge or approval prior to action. It was in plain terms a document that would hand Derek and Sandra complete control of $22 million the moment I signed my name on page 12. "Can I hold on to this for a few days?" I asked. "I'd like to read the whole thing carefully before I do anything. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Derek's jaw tightened by a fraction. He recovered quickly, but I had been watching for it. "Of course," he said. "No rush at all." He smiled. "Take all the time you need." Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder. She looked at the manila folder in my hands, and then at Derek, and something passed between them that was not meant for me to read. "More coffee, Dad?" she asked. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. That afternoon, I drove to Caldwell's office with the document in my coat pocket and Buddy riding in the passenger seat. Caldwell read all 12 pages without speaking. When he finished, he set the document flat on the desk and looked at it for a moment. "This is aggressive," he said. "No transaction limits, no notification requirements, no co-signature provisions. If you had signed this, they could have liquidated every asset Earl left you within 30 days, and there would have been very little the probate court could do to recover the funds quickly." He looked up. "Ray, whoever he is, didn't draft this. This was written by someone who specializes in elder financial exploitation. The language is too specific." "Can you find out who wrote it?" I asked. "Already noted the firm name on page 1, Caldwell said, tapping the corner of the document. "I'll have my paralegal pull their bar records. If they have a history of drafting these instruments for exploitation cases, that goes into our file." He picked up his pen and made a note on his legal pad. "Every page of this is evidence," he said. "Derek handed you a fully executed document with signature tabs already in place. That tells us he expected you to sign it at that kitchen table this morning. That level of preparation combined with the guardianship petition gives us a very clear picture of coordinated financial elder abuse under Illinois statute." I sat back in the chair. Buddy put his chin on my knee. "What do I do when I go back tonight?" I asked. "Tell him you read it carefully, and it all makes sense," Caldwell said. "Tell him you just want to ask Caldwell 1 or 2 small questions before you sign, just to be thorough so nobody can say later you didn't understand what you were agreeing to." He allowed himself a thin smile. "That will frustrate him, but it won't alarm him. It sounds exactly like something a cautious old man would say." I picked up the document from the desk and slid it back into my coat pocket. "One more thing," Caldwell said. "Has anything changed about the food or drinks in the house? Anything that seemed off?" I thought about the past week. The coffee Derek brought every morning. The herbal tea Sandra had started leaving on the counter each evening, already brewed, already poured. "There's a tea," I said slowly. "Sandra makes it every evening. Says it helps with sleep." Caldwell looked at me steadily. "Have you been drinking it?" "First 2 nights," I said. "Both times I was unusually drowsy within the hour. I thought I was just tired." Caldwell wrote something down. His expression did not change, but something behind it went very precise and very quiet. "Don't drink anything you haven't prepared yourself," he said. From tonight forward, I drove back to Sandra's house in the early November dark with the document in my pocket and Caldwell's last instruction sitting in my chest like a cold stone. Buddy leaned against the passenger door and watched the streetlights go past one after another, steady and reliable as anything in the world. The man arrived on Saturday morning in a gray sedan. I watched him pull into the driveway from the guest room window. He was maybe 45 medium height, a dark overcoat carrying a slim briefcase that looked expensive relative to everything else about him. He had the particular walk of a man who had been paid to project confidence and was working at it. Derek met him at the door before the doorbell finished ringing. I came downstairs at my own pace. "Dad," Derek said, turning with a wide smile, one hand on the stranger's shoulder. "This is Mitchell Greer. He's a financial consultant I've been working with. He helps families navigate estate transitions. I thought it might be good for you two to meet." Mitchell Greer extended his hand and shook mine with the calibrated firmness of a man who had learned exactly how firm a handshake should be. "Mr. Gaines," he said, "I've heard a lot about you. Derek speaks very highly. Sunyata, is that right?" I said. Sandra appeared from the kitchen and suggested we sit in the living room, and she brought coffee and a plate of those cookies from the bakery on Elm that had been appearing regularly for the past 2 weeks as a form of hospitality currency. Mitchell Greer set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the unhurried movements of a man comfortable with his own presentation. He removed a bound document, perhaps 20 pages, with a cover page bearing the name of a financial services firm in a clean professional font. "What I've put together for you," he said, settling back and addressing me directly in the tone of a man who explains things to elderly people for a living, "is what we call a family asset protection agreement. It's specifically designed for situations like yours, where a significant inheritance needs to be managed carefully to protect it from tax exposure, market volatility, and the costs of probate administration." I looked at the cover page. The firm name was unfamiliar. The address was a suite number in a downtown office building, the kind of address that could belong to a single room with a printer and a phone. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" I asked. 12 years, he said without any hesitation that would have told me he was calculating. "Primarily estate transitions and family wealth management." I nodded slowly. "What does the agreement actually do?" Mitchell Greer had a prepared answer for this. He had prepared answers for everything which was itself information. "It consolidates the management of the estate assets under a single administrative structure," he said, "with Sandra and Derek designated as co-administrators. This eliminates the delays and costs associated with going through the probate court for routine decisions. It protects the assets from creditor claims during the administration period. And it ensures continuity, so if anything were to happen to you, there's no gap in management." Every sentence he said was technically composed of real words in a legal-sounding order. None of it described what the document in my hands actually said. I turned to page 3. The Family Asset Protection Agreement was not a protection instrument. It was a transfer mechanism. Upon execution, it would move all estate assets into a jointly administered trust, with Sandra and Derek as sole trustees with the authority to buy, sell, liquidate, or distribute assets at their sole discretion with no requirement for court oversight, no reporting obligation to the probate estate, and no mechanism for the original grantor, meaning me, to revoke the transfer once made. In plain terms, sign it, and I was done. "Can I get a copy of this to look over?" I asked. "I'd like to show it to my doctor. He helps me with paperwork." A brief flicker crossed Mitchell Greer's face, not quite alarm, more like recalculation. "Of course," he said. "That's very reasonable." Derek was watching me from the armchair with the expression of a man holding very still. Sandra refilled the coffee cups with a steady hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. I took the bound document and held it in my lap and asked Mitchell Greer several more questions about things I already understood, completely framed in the vocabulary of a man who found large numbers confusing, and he answered each one with patient condescension that went directly into the recording device in my breast pocket. After an hour, Mitchell Greer shook my hand again and told me he was confident we would find the arrangement very straightforward once I had a chance to review it carefully, and Derek walked him to the door and from the hallway I could hear their voices drop to a register not meant for me, brief and urgent, the register of a conversation between two men who are behind schedule. That afternoon I photographed every page of the Family Asset Protection Agreement on my phone and sent the images to Caldwell. He called me within 20 minutes. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Parked outside a hardware store on Jefferson," I said. "Needed some air." Good. His voice had the focused quality it got when something significant had landed on his desk. "Mitchell Greer is not a licensed financial consultant in the state of Illinois. I just ran his name through the IDFPR database. The Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation has no record of him holding any active license in financial services, investment advising, or estate planning." I watched a woman load bags into her trunk across the parking lot. "So he's not a consultant," I said. "He is not," Caldwell said. "He is a man Derek hired to produce a document designed to transfer your assets outside the supervision of the probate court. That is wire fraud, mail fraud, if he sent anything through the post, and elder financial exploitation under Illinois Criminal Code Section 1756. All of it is now documented." A pause. "Walter, we have enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. "Height enough to bring this to the investigators," he said. "The Adult Protective Services Financial Crimes Unit and the state's attorney's office have both been briefed. They're ready to move when we are." Another pause. "The only question is when and where you want this to end." I thought about the backyard of Earl's house on the east side of town, the flat lawn and the old oak trees and the wide sky above the back fence. "I have an idea about that," I said. The tea appeared every evening at 7 o'clock. Sandra would set it on the kitchen counter in a white ceramic mug, already poured steam rising the smell of chamomile and something else underneath that I could not quite identify. She never pushed it. She never stood there watching me drink it. She just left it there the way you leave something for a person you expect to reach for it out of habit. After Caldwell's warning, I stopped reaching for it. I poured it down the kitchen sink each evening when Sandra was in another room, rinsing the mug and setting it back on the counter so the level in the pot dropped the way it would if someone had consumed a full serving. On the third evening, Derek looked at the empty mug on the counter, and something in his posture settled a small, satisfied adjustment, the kind a person makes when a system is working the way they designed it to work. I took a sample of the tea on the fourth evening, drew it off into a small glass bottle I had purchased at the pharmacy on Clement Street, and drove it to Caldwell the following morning. He sent it to a private toxicology lab in Chicago. The results came back in 6 days. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine sedative prescription only, typically used for anxiety and sleep disorders. In low doses administered repeatedly, it produces drowsiness, mild cognitive slowing, and reduced alertness, exactly the profile of a man who appears to be losing his edge, who needs guidance, who might reasonably be deemed incapable of managing his own affairs by a physician conducting a cursory evaluation. Caldwell called me with the results on a Tuesday morning while I was walking Buddy along the edge of Earl's property on the east side of town. "The concentration is consistent with a standard low dose," he said, "administered regularly over a period of weeks. At this level, it wouldn't show dramatic symptoms, just gradual dulling." A pause. "This is criminal, Walter. Administering a controlled substance to another person without their knowledge or consent is a felony under Illinois law, specifically under the criminal drugging statute, and separately under elder abuse provisions." I stood at the back fence of Earl's property and looked out at the wide, flat yard with the oak trees along the perimeter and the gray November sky above them. "Has it gone into the file?" I asked. "So everything has gone into the file," Caldwell said. "The toxicology report, the chain of custody documentation for the sample, my notes, on when you first noticed the symptoms. Adult Protective Services has a financial crimes investigator named Donna Reyes assigned to the case. She reviewed the full file yesterday. She's ready. I was quiet for a moment. Buddy moved along the fence line with his nose close to the ground, methodical and content. "James," I said, "I want to do this at Earl's house." "Tell me what you're thinking," Caldwell said. I told him about the backyard, the oak trees, the flat lawn that had hosted summer evenings for years. I told him about the people I wanted to invite: Mrs. Patterson, who had given me a room when I had nothing; Clara Osgood, the nurse at the Clement Street Clinic, who had helped me get my blood pressure prescription refilled when I had no car and no insurance card because it was still addressed to Sandra's house; Phil Dawson, who ran Earl's Stations and had known him for 11 years; a few of the neighbors from Earl's block who had waved at me every morning when I walked Buddy past their houses. "And Sandra and Derek," I said. "Of course," Caldwell said. "I want to invite them as family," I said. "I want them to come thinking it's a celebration. I want them to bring food and smile at the neighbors and feel like they've won." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "And Donna Reyes?" "She and her colleague can arrive at 2 o'clock, I said. "After we've been there long enough for everyone to settle in." "That works," Caldwell said. "I'll coordinate with her office." Another pause. "What about the tea?" I had already thought about this. "Sandra will bring it," I said. "She's been bringing food and drinks every time she visits. She won't come empty-handed to a party. And when she offers it to me, I'm going to give it to Derek." The silence on Caldwell's end was brief and very satisfied. "I'll be there at noon," he said. I walked back across Earl's yard toward the house, with Buddy moving beside me through the dry November grass. I stopped at the back door and stood for a moment with my hand on the frame. Clara Osgood had found me sitting on the clinic steps one morning in late October, 3 weeks after Derek had locked me out, trying to figure out how to get my prescription without a current insurance card. She had been coming off a night shift, tired coat half on keys in her hand. She had taken 20 minutes. She did not have to help me navigate the system called the insurance line herself, waited on hold, and gotten it sorted. She had not asked why I was in that situation. She had just helped. I pulled out my phone and called her. "Clara," I said when she answered, her voice carrying the slightly flattened quality of someone at the end of a long shift. "This is Walter Gaines. You helped me with my prescription back in October." "Mr. Gaines." Her voice warmed immediately. "Of course. How are you doing?" "Better than I was," I said. "I'm having some people over on Saturday the 14th. Just a small gathering backyard barbecue. Nothing fancy. I'd really like it if you came." A short pause. "I'd like that," she said. "Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," I said. "That's more than enough." I hung up and looked at the yard one more time. The oak trees were bare now, branches clean against the gray sky, the kind of stark November beauty that does not ask you to feel anything in particular, but gives you the space to feel whatever is there. Earl had stood in this yard for 30 years. He had built something here, not just the house and the stations and the portfolio, but something quieter. A life with room in it for other people. I intended to honor that. I was up before sunrise. Buddy heard me moving around the kitchen at 5:30 and padded in from the living room, his nails clicking on the hardwood tail, moving in that slow, certain arc that meant he was content with whatever was happening as long as he was included in it. I poured his food and made coffee and stood at Earl's kitchen window watching the December sky go from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before the first gray light of a winter morning. Earl had stood at this window, probably most mornings for 30 years. I wondered what he had thought about, whether it had been the stations or the properties or the portfolio, or whether it had just been the yard and the oak trees and the coffee going warm between his hands. I thought it was probably the coffee and the trees. Phil Dawson arrived at 8 with two of his guys from the East Side station, and they set up the grill in the backyard with the efficient coordination of men who knew how to manage logistics without a lot of conversation. Phil was 61, a compact man with a gray mustache and the particular ease of someone who had spent decades making things run correctly and took quiet satisfaction in that. "He would have loved this," Phil said, nodding at the yard. "He really would have," I said. Phil squeezed my shoulder once and went back to the grill without making it into anything more, which was exactly right. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 9:30 with 2 apple pies in a carrier and her good coat on. She set the pies on the folding table I had set up along the back fence and looked around the yard with the evaluating eye of a woman assessing whether a situation had been handled properly. "Nice yard," she said. "Earl kept it up." "He did," I agreed. "You going to keep it up?" "I'm going to try," I said. She nodded once satisfied and went to introduce herself to Phil's crew. Clara arrived at 10:15, still in her scrubs under her coat, coming straight from a morning shift at the clinic. She shook my hand and looked around the yard with the slightly dazed expression of someone who had expected something smaller. "This is really something, Mr. Gaines," she said. "Walter," I told her. "Please." She smiled, and it was the genuine kind, no performance in it. Caldwell arrived at 11:30 with his briefcase and a covered dish. His wife had sent a green bean casserole that he set on the table with slightly more care than a man who considered himself entirely unsentimental. He caught my eye and tilted his head toward the far corner of the yard. We stood by the back fence out of earshot. He opened his briefcase and handed me a manila envelope, thick-sealed. "Everything is in there," he said quietly. Toxicology report, full recording transcripts, the power of attorney document, the family asset protection agreement with Mitchell Greer's fraudulent credentials, attached the guardianship petition filing, and Donna Reyes's preliminary investigative report. He paused. "Donna and her colleague will come through the side gate at 2 o'clock. They'll stay back until you signal." I tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of my coat. "The recording device?" he asked. I patted my breast pocket. Still there. Still running. By 11:45, the yard had the particular quality of a good gathering finding its natural level. Phil manning the grill, Mrs. Patterson talking to a neighbor couple from Earl's block named Jim and Rose Kowalski, who had brought a fruit salad and a 12-pack of root beer, Clara sitting on the back steps with Buddy's head in her lap, looking like she had always been there. At 11:58, the side gate opened. Sandra came through first, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a smile calibrated to project warmth at a gathering where she needed people to like her. Derek followed with a paper bag, a bottle of wine, and that particular social ease he deployed when he needed a room to be on his side. And behind them, holding a thermal carafe with both hands, Sandra turned back and said brightly to the yard in general, "I made herbal tea. Dad loves it before a big meal." She set the carafe on the table next to Mrs. Patterson's apple pies. I looked at the carafe. I looked at Derek, shaking Phil's hand. I looked at Mrs. Patterson watching Sandra with the expression of a woman who had seen enough of the world to be watching carefully. I picked up my coffee mug and walked toward the grill. The moment was coming. I could feel it moving toward me through the cold December air, like weather you can see on the horizon before it arrives, slow and certain and entirely unavoidable. By 1 o'clock, the yard had settled into itself the way good gatherings do. Phil had the ribs going on the grill, the smoke drifting slow and fragrant across the cold December air. Jim Kowalski had claimed the folding chair nearest the heat, and was talking to Phil about something that involved a lot of hand gestures. Rose was helping Mrs. Patterson set out the side dishes on the table along the fence. Clara sat cross-legged on the back steps with Buddy feeding him small pieces of something from her plate. And Buddy accepted each piece with the grave dignity of a dog who understood he was at a party. Derek had worked the yard for the first hour with impressive energy, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, refilling people's drinks, performing the role of the attentive son-in-law with the practiced fluency of a man who had spent his whole adult life understanding that other people's goodwill was a resource to be cultivated. Sandra moved through the gathering more quietly, steadier, a hand on someone's arm here, a warm word there. She was better at this than Derek, more natural, and watching her, I felt the particular ache of recognizing what she could have been if she had pointed herself in a different direction. At 1:15, Sandra came to where I was standing near the oak trees with my coffee mug and a plate of potato salad I had been slowly working through. She said, picking up the carafe from the side table and carrying it over. "You haven't had any tea. Let me pour you some." She reached for my empty coffee mug. "It's cold out here. This'll warm you up." She poured. The steam came up from the mug with that chamomile and underneath smell I had learned to recognize. She held it out to me with a smile that was almost entirely convincing. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I took the mug in both hands. Then I turned and walked toward the grill, where Derek was standing with Phil. His own hands empty his plate on the side table, and I held the mug out toward him. "Derek," I said pleasantly, "Sandra made tea. You've been on your feet all morning. You should have some." Something crossed his face. Fast, involuntary there and gone in under a second. His eyes moved to the mug, and then to me, and then to Sandra across the yard. And I watched him calculate whether there was a way to decline that would not look strange in front of Phil Dawson and Jim Kowalski and everyone else within eyeline. There was not. He took the mug. "Thanks, Dad," he said, and his voice was perfectly steady, which told me how much effort it took to make it so. He drank. Not all of it immediately, just a polite swallow, and then he set the mug on the edge of the side table and turned back to the conversation with Phil. 8 minutes later, Phil said something to Derek that required a response, and Derek opened his mouth, and what came out was not the word he intended. He blinked. He tried again. His hand went out to the side table and knocked the mug sideways, catching it before it fell, but only just his fingers not closing the way he'd expected them to. "You all right?" Phil asked. "Fine," Derek said, but the word came out soft and slightly sideways, and his eyes had gone heavy at the corners, the way eyes go when the brain behind them is working much harder than usual, just to stay on the surface. The yard went quiet by degrees, the way a room goes quiet when something is happening that everyone can see, but nobody has named yet. Sandra was staring at Derek from across the yard, with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, and her face had gone a color that was not quite white, but was getting there. I set my plate down on the side table. I picked up the carafe and carried it to the center table where Mrs. Patterson's apple pies were, and set it down where everyone could see it. Then I stood up straight and looked around at the faces in Earl's backyard. Phil, who had run Earl's stations for 11 years. Mrs. Patterson, who had handed me a key to room 7 without asking a single question. Clara, who had waited on hold at the insurance line so I could get my blood pressure medication. Jim and Rose Kowalski, who had waved at me every morning from their front porch when I walked Buddy past their house, and I had been nobody to them but a man with a dog. James Caldwell stood near the back fence with his hands in his coat pockets, watching. Derek was leaning against the side table now, his hand gripping the edge, his jaw working at something he was not quite able to say. I spoke in a voice that was clear and unhurried, and carried across the yard without needing to be loud. 2 weeks ago, I said, my daughter and her husband put me out of their house in the rain with $500 and a broken suitcase. Today they came back with ribs and apple pie and herbal tea. I looked at the carafe. The tea has been in my home every evening for the past 3 weeks. 2 evenings I drank it. Both times I was asleep within the hour, slower than I should have been, confused in ways I am not usually confused. I reached into my coat and brought out the manila envelope. A toxicology report from a licensed laboratory in Chicago confirmed that the tea contains lorazepam. That is a prescription sedative. Administering it to another person without their knowledge is a felony in the state of Illinois. Sandra made a sound that was not a word. Derek straightened up from the table, his eyes clearer now, with something that was pushing through the lorazepam on pure adrenaline. And he opened his mouth, and whatever he was going to say came out as the wrong kind of noise entirely. I was not finished. I opened the manila envelope. The first page was the toxicology report. I held it up so the December light caught it clearly and read the relevant line aloud. Lorazepam detected. Concentration consistent with repeated low-dose administration over a period of 2 to 4 weeks. I set it on the table. This is from Midwest Toxicology Partners in Chicago. Licensed laboratory. Certified chain of custody. Sandra's hands came up and covered her mouth. Her shoulders pulled inward, like something collapsing from the center. Derek straightened fully, the lorazepam fighting the adrenaline in his system, and his voice came out louder than he intended. That is completely fabricated. You cannot stand here in front of these people and accuse us of poisoning you based on some document you paid someone to produce. Derek. My voice was very quiet. Every word you say right now is being recorded. I reached up and touched my breast pocket once. Just once. His mouth closed. I set the second document on the table beside the toxicology report. This is the durable power of attorney your associate Ray drafted. 12 pages. No transaction limits. No notification requirements. Full authority over all accounts and properties. I set down the third. This is the Family Asset Protection Agreement that Mitchell Greer presented on your behalf on a Saturday morning in November. Mitchell Greer holds no active license with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. I checked. James Caldwell checked. The state's attorney's office has also checked. Phil Dawson had set down his tongs. Jim Kowalski had stopped talking entirely. Mrs. Patterson stood at the end of the table with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who had suspected something and was not surprised to be right. Clara had her hand on Buddy's back. Buddy had not moved from the steps. I set down the fourth document. This is the guardianship petition Sandra and Derek filed 4 days after Sandra first appeared at my door with a casserole dish. They filed it on the same week they were offering to help me navigate the estate. They were asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent while simultaneously presenting themselves as my trusted family support. I looked at Sandra directly. You filed it on a Tuesday. You brought the casserole on a Friday. Sandra made a sound that started as a denial and became something else entirely, a ragged, broken exhale that bent her forward at the waist. She grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles going white, tears dropping straight down onto the tablecloth. Dad, she said, her voice shredding at the edges. Dad, please. I know how this looks. I know. But I was scared. Derek said we were going to lose everything, that the bills were too much, that this was the only way to get stable. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. Sandra. My voice did not rise. The night Tyler stood on the front walk in his socks and told me what Derek had said you were inside stirring the pot roast. You heard him tell your 9-year-old son that his grandfather wasn't family anymore if he didn't produce money. And you stirred the pot roast. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the table edge barely. Derek stepped forward. His jaw set, his eyes hard, with the particular fury of a man watching his plan collapse and looking for someone to blame it on. You set us up, he said, his voice tight and shaking. You invited us here to humiliate us in front of strangers. You are a vindictive old man who never gave his own family a chance, and now you want to destroy us for trying to survive. No, I said. I gave my family 14 months. I fixed your disposal and your faucet and your screen door. I watched your son 3 afternoons a week. I slept in a storage room with a draft through the wall, and I did not complain once. I picked up the manila envelope and held it. I did not set a trap for you, Derek. I simply stopped moving out of the way and let you walk into the one you built yourselves. The side gate opened at exactly 2 o'clock. Donna Reyes came through, first a compact woman in her early 50s, in a gray coat, her colleague half a step behind her. She moved with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this many times and did not need to announce herself to command a space. She looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Derek. She looked at me. Mr. Gaines, she said. Donna Reyes, Adult Protective Services Financial Crimes Unit. I believe you have something for me. I handed her the manila envelope. Derek's face went through several things in rapid succession: anger calculation, and then something that was not quite fear, but was its close neighbor. He looked at Caldwell standing near the back fence. Caldwell looked back at him with the expression of a man who has nothing left to explain. You need to come with us, Donna Reyes said to Derek. Not loudly, not with any drama, just the plain declarative sentence of a woman who meant exactly what she said. We have some questions. Sandra was still holding the table edge, her head down, crying in the way that comes after everything else has run out. Not performance. Just the sound a person makes when the version of themselves they had been maintaining finally gives way entirely. I looked at her for a long moment. You are welcome to call Tyler whenever you want, I said. That has nothing to do with any of this. He is 9 years old and none of this is his. She lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red and entirely without strategy. Dad, she whispered. Go home, Sandra, I said. Get a lawyer. Take care of your son. She let go of the table. She walked to the side gate without looking at Derek, without looking at anyone, and she went through it and was gone. Derek went with Donna Reyes and her colleague through the same gate 2 minutes later, his hands at his sides, his jaw still set. But something behind his eyes had gone very quiet, in the way things go quiet, when a person finally understands the size of what they are standing in. The gate closed. The yard was still. Buddy walked across the dead grass and sat on my feet. Monday morning, I renewed my room at Mrs. Patterson's for another 6 months. She looked at the check I set on her kitchen table, and then looked at me with the expression she used when she had an opinion she was deciding whether to share. You know you could afford something nicer, she said. I know, I said. She picked up the check. Room 7's yours. I had thought about moving into Earl's house. I had stood in every room of it, walked the yard at different times of day, sat in Earl's kitchen chair with my coffee, and tried to feel whether it fit. It was a good house. Earl had kept it well. But every time I sat in it, I felt like a guest waiting for the owner to come back, and the owner was not coming back, and I did not think making his house mine was the same thing as honoring what he had built. Room 7 was mine. It had been mine from the first night. The tilting lamp and the Ohio-shaped water stain and the radiator that knocked and hissed had become the particular geography of a life I had built from nothing, and I was not ready to trade that for something larger just because I could. Sandra called on a Wednesday afternoon in January. I was at Earl's East Side station, sitting with Phil in the small office behind the register, going over the lease renewals for the commercial properties with the careful attention of a man learning a new trade at 69. I answered. "How's Tyler?" I asked before she could say anything else. A pause. Then, "He's good. He made the basketball team at school." Her voice was careful and stripped of its social register, just her actual voice, which I had not heard clearly in a long time. "Dad, I'm not calling about the money. I'm not calling about any of that. I just wanted to know if you were okay." "I'm okay," I said. Another pause. "What are you keeping the money for, Dad?" She asked, her voice quieter than usual, the way it gets when she is saying something she actually means. "You're still in that little room." I looked out the office window at Phil talking to a customer at the pump, his hands in his vest pockets, his posture easy and familiar. "To know who comes looking for me when I'm still just a man in a small room," I said. She did not answer for a moment. When she did, her voice had something in it that I recognized as the beginning of understanding, which is a different thing from agreement and takes longer to arrive. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, Dad." I told her to give Tyler my number. She said she would. In February, Caldwell and I filed the paperwork to establish the Earl Mitchell Scholarship Fund as a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization under Illinois law. The fund was designed to provide annual scholarships to students at Rockford area vocational schools, pursuing careers in the trades, mechanics, electrical work, plumbing, the work that Earl and I had both started with, and that neither of us had ever thought of as lesser than anything else. The first awards would go out in the spring. Phil came to the filing meeting and brought two of his longest-serving station employees, both of whom had started as mechanics and worked their way into management under Earl's particular brand of patient, demanding mentorship. They sat around Caldwell's conference table and talked about Earl for an hour before we got to the paperwork, and it was the best hour I had spent in an attorney's office. On a Saturday in late February, I drove to each of Earl's 8 stations. Not to inspect or evaluate or make decisions, just to be there. I shook hands with the people who had shown up every day for years and kept the lights on and the pumps running, because Earl had hired well and treated people right, and they had returned the favor by caring about the work. At the last station, the original one on the east side, Phil walked me back to the small lot behind the building where Earl had parked his truck for 11 years. The space was empty now. There was an oil stain on the concrete that had been there so long it had become part of the pavement. "He talked about you," Phil said. "Not often, but when he did, it was always the same way. He'd say, 'My friend Walter,' and then whatever came next, like your name was just part of whatever the point was." I did not have an answer for that. I pressed my hand flat against the cold concrete wall of the station and held it there for a moment. That evening, I sat on the bench in Earl's backyard, with Buddy beside me, both of us facing the oak trees in the last of the February light. I took the watch from my coat pocket and turned it in my fingers, the scratched crystal, the slow movement of the hands. I opened the case back and read the engraving one more time. "Thank you for saving my life that year. Everything after was because of you." I had spent 38 years thinking I had not done anything special. A tire iron and a frozen roadside and 2 minutes of being in the right place. Earl had spent 38 years building 8 gas stations and 7 commercial properties, and a managed portfolio and a dog named Buddy and a scholarship fund that did not exist yet, but would because of an afternoon in 1987 that I had filed away as unremarkable. I put the watch on my wrist, not because I had decided to keep it. I had always been going to keep it. I put it on because it was February and cold, and Buddy was leaning against my leg with his whole warm weight, and Earl had been right about everything, and it was time I started wearing the evidence of that. Buddy lifted his head and looked at me. "You know what Earl would say right now?" I asked him. His tail moved once slow and certain, the same arc it had described in the hallway outside room 7 on the night all of this began. He'd say, "Stop sitting around, old man. There's still work to do." I stood up. My knees complained the way they always do in cold weather. I looked at the oak trees and the flat yard and the February sky going pink and gray above the back fence. Then I went inside and got back to work. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that blood is not a contract. I learned that loyalty is shown in what people do when you have nothing to offer them, not in what they say when you suddenly have everything. I stayed in room 7 longer than I needed to, because I wanted to be certain. And I was right to wait. The people who knocked on my door when I was nobody, Mrs. Patterson, Clara, Phil, those were my family. The people who came running when they heard the number 22 million, well, that story tells itself. If I could go back and give my younger self one piece of advice, it would be this: do not sell the house your wife loved and move into someone else's space, hoping that proximity will manufacture connection. Real family does not need you nearby. Real family finds you wherever you are. I am not a bitter man. I believe, as I have always believed, that God puts the right people in front of you at the right moment. Earl was proof of that. So was a 13-year-old Labrador who pressed his head against my leg in a boarding house hallway and decided I was worth staying with. This has been one of my grandpastories, a revenge story that was never really about revenge at all. It was about learning late, but not too late, who actually deserved a seat at my table. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below and tell me whose loyalty surprised you most in either direction. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. One last thing, some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements, built purely for reflection and to illustrate truths we sometimes struggle to say plainly. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find what speaks to you. But if you are still here, well, I think you already know why these grandpastories and revenge story journeys keep pulling you back.